The PlayStation 1 had some of the most memorable and important games ever made, and a lot of them are still great to play today. In this video, I'll be revisiting old PS1 classics, reviewing how well they hold up, and sharing my personal experience with each game. Some still feel amazing today, while others surprise me more than I expected. Alright, let's get into it. Silent Hill started as something I expected to age badly, but after a few hours, I completely understood why people still talk about it today. Walking through the empty streets with that thick fog everywhere made even simple exploration feel stressful in a way modern horror games rarely manage. I kept hearing strange noises in the distance while barely seeing what was ahead, and that constant tension stayed with me almost the entire time. The combat feels rough now, and the voice acting can sound awkward, but none of that really damaged the experience. The atmosphere carries the whole game so hard that I still remember certain areas long after finishing it, especially the dark school and hospital sections. Crash Team Racing was a racing game I played constantly as a kid because I always wanted to unlock more characters, master shortcuts, and beat my best times on every track. I spent hours searching online for cheat codes after realizing the internet had all the secrets I wanted. The drifting system still feels surprisingly smooth today, especially once I learned how to chain boosts during races without losing speed. I also liked how every track had hazards, hidden paths, and different layouts that made progression feel rewarding instead of repetitive. The colorful visual style still looks great, and the controls respond much better than I expected from an older racing game. Even now, it feels better than many kart racers released years later. Final Fantasy VII completely changed how large-scale RPG adventures felt to me, because every new area seemed important and worth exploring. Leaving Midgar for the first time genuinely surprised me since I thought the entire adventure would stay inside that city. I spent so much time exploring towns, leveling characters, finding hidden scenes, and listening to conversations that added more depth to the world. The story becomes emotional in ways I did not expect, especially once Cloud's past slowly starts coming together piece by piece. Even with the older visuals, the atmosphere still works because the music and world design carry so much weight. The turn-based combat also stays fun thanks to the materia system, letting me experiment with different abilities during almost every major fight. Tomb Raider gave me a completely different experience from most action games because exploring ancient ruins mattered just as much as surviving the danger inside them. I spent a lot of time carefully lining up jumps, solving strange puzzles, and checking every corner for secrets while trying not to fall into traps. Lara Croft quickly became memorable because she stayed calm and capable even when the game became stressful. Some of the controls definitely show their age now, but the atmosphere still works because the empty caves, giant tombs, and quiet environments create a strong sense of isolation. I also liked how the game rarely guided me directly, so discovering hidden paths and solving puzzles became much more rewarding than I expected during the adventure. Medal of Honor stood apart from many shooters at the time because it focused more on atmosphere and mission variety instead of non-stop action. I liked sneaking through enemy bases, stealing documents, wearing disguises, and completing objectives that changed the pace from simple shooting. The weapons sounded powerful, and the slower movement made every firefight more tense than I expected from an older shooter. Some missions also surprised me with how creative they were, especially when the game mixed stealth with large battles. Even now, the campaign still has a lot of charm because the level design and mission variety stop things from becoming repetitive. It also helped me appreciate how influential this series became for military shooters released years later.
Round 2, fight!
Tekken 3 completely changed how I looked at fighting games because the movement and combat felt much smoother than most games I played at the time. I spent hours learning combos, trying different characters, and replaying matches just to get better with each fighter. Eddie Gordo especially became a favorite because his fighting style looked wild even when I barely understood what I was doing. The roster had a lot of personality, and nearly every character played differently enough to stay interesting. I also liked how the game included extra modes like Tekken Force and Tekken Ball, since they added variety outside normal fights. Even now, the fast gameplay and responsive controls still make it easy for me to go back and enjoy it again.
Once more now, kick!
PaRappa the Rapper looked and sounded completely different from anything else I played at the time. The paper-thin art style, strange characters, and goofy rap battles made the entire game feel weird in the best possible way. I still remember trying to memorize the button timing during the later songs because some stages became surprisingly difficult once the rhythm sped up. The driving test and karate sections especially stayed memorable because the songs were so catchy and ridiculous at the same time. I also liked how the game encouraged me to freestyle a little instead of only following exact button prompts. Very few rhythm games have matched the same personality and charm this game managed to create with such a simple idea and presentation. Resident Evil 2 was the moment survival horror really clicked with me, because the police station created constant tension the entire time I explored it. I remember walking through dark hallways with barely any ammo, hearing zombies nearby, and constantly deciding whether I should fight or save resources for later. Leon and Claire both made the story more interesting since seeing different parts of the outbreak added more depth to Raccoon City. I also liked how the puzzles slowed things down between intense moments, which made exploration much more memorable. The fixed camera angles and older controls definitely take time to adjust to now, but the atmosphere still works incredibly well. Very few horror games manage to create the same pressure and suspense this consistently. Ape Escape was such a strange and creative platformer that I ended up enjoying it far more than I expected. Running around different stages while chasing monkeys with gadgets made the entire game feel playful in a way most platformers did not at the time. I liked switching between tools like the net, stun club, and slingshot, because each gadget changed how I approached certain areas and enemies. The controls also felt surprisingly smooth once I got used to using both analog sticks together. Some monkeys were genuinely annoying to catch, especially the faster ones that constantly escaped at the last second. The goofy style, colorful levels, and weird sense of humor gave the game a lot of personality that still makes it memorable today. Vagrant Story confused me a little at first because the combat and weapon systems were much deeper than I expected from an older RPG. After spending more time with it, I started appreciating how much control the game gives during battles, especially when targeting specific body parts and chaining attacks together. The dark atmosphere inside Leomond also made the adventure feel heavy and mysterious almost the entire way through. I liked how the story slowly revealed information instead of explaining everything immediately, which made the political conflicts and characters more interesting to follow. The visuals still look unique because of the sharp character designs and cinematic presentation. It is also surprising how ambitious the game still feels compared to many other RPGs released around the same time. Legacy of Kain, Soul Reaver had such a dark and strange atmosphere that I immediately wanted to explore more of its world. Raziel also became a memorable character very quickly because his voice, design, and revenge story gave the adventure a much heavier tone than most action games from that era. I spent a lot of time solving environmental puzzles, switching between the material and spectral realms, and trying to understand where the story was heading next. Some puzzles genuinely made me stop and think for a while before finally figuring them out. The voice acting still sounds surprisingly strong today, and the gothic environments give the world a unique identity. Few older games combine exploration, storytelling, and atmosphere together this well. Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 2 completely took over my free time once I started learning how to chain long combos together across entire levels. I spent hours replaying stages just to improve scores, find secret areas, and land tricks that looked impossible when I first started playing. The controls were incredibly smooth, which made experimenting with manuals, grinds, and huge combo lines genuinely addictive. I also liked how every map had its own personality, whether I was skating through schools, streets, or massive competition arenas. Creating custom skaters and parks added even more replay value, especially when I wanted something different from the normal career mode. Very few sports games from that era still feel this fast, responsive, and endlessly replayable today.
The heads up, cat.
Spider-Man nailed the feeling of being Spider-Man better than I expected from an older superhero game. Swinging between buildings, chasing villains across rooftops, and throwing web attacks during fights made the entire adventure constantly entertaining. I also liked how the game mixed combat, platforming, and stealth sections instead of repeating the same thing every level. Hearing Spider-Man joke during fights added a lot of personality, especially during encounters with famous villains from the comics. Some camera problems can definitely make certain indoor sections frustrating, but the outdoor stages are still a lot of fun to move through. The fast pacing and comic book style presentation still make it easy for me to understand why so many people remember this game so fondly. Final Fantasy IX brought back a classic fantasy style that made the adventure feel warm, emotional, and personal at the same time. I really liked traveling between towns, airships, forests, and castles, because every new location looked completely different from the last. Zidane also made the story more enjoyable since his personality felt more energetic and friendly compared to some older RPG protagonists. Vivi especially became unforgettable because his story quietly handled loneliness and identity in a much heavier way than I expected. The turn-based combat stays fun thanks to the ability system and large party variety, which encouraged me to constantly experiment with different setups. The world, characters, and atmosphere still make this adventure incredibly memorable years later. Syphon Filter combined stealth and action in a way that made the missions much more intense than I expected from an older shooter. I spent a lot of time sneaking through buildings, protecting allies, and carefully dealing with enemies before situations turned chaotic. Gabe Logan also made the adventure memorable because he felt more grounded compared to many action heroes from that era. The controls can definitely feel awkward now, especially during aiming sections, but the mission variety helped me stay interested the entire time. I also remember the taser being ridiculous since enemies could literally catch fire if I used it long enough. The darker atmosphere, spy story, and fast pacing still give the game a unique identity compared to many shooters released around it. Gran Turismo 2 made racing games much more addictive to me because there was always another car to unlock, upgrade, or test on a different track. I spent a huge amount of time earning licenses, saving credits, and experimenting with how different vehicles handled during races. What I liked most was how every car actually drove differently, so switching from a lightweight sports car to something heavier completely changed the experience. The amount of content also felt massive back then, with so many tracks, manufacturers, and customization options to explore. Some races could become difficult once faster opponents appeared, but improving lap times and learning tracks made progression rewarding. The realistic approach to driving still helps this game stand apart from many arcade racers released during that era. Metal Gear Solid completely changed how I looked at storytelling in games because it felt more like playing through a tense action movie than a normal stealth adventure. Sneaking past guards, hiding inside cardboard boxes, and carefully watching enemy patrols made every area much more intense than simply running in with weapons. I also liked how the bosses all had unique personalities and fights that felt different from each other instead of repeating the same ideas. The voice acting still sounds excellent today, especially during the long codec conversations that added more depth to the story and characters. Some sections can feel slow because of the backtracking, but the atmosphere and stealth gameplay still hold up incredibly well after all these years.
Crystal. The crystals look like this.
Crash Bandicoot 2 Cortex Strikes Back improved almost everything I wanted from the first game and quickly became a platformer I could play for hours without getting bored. I liked how the warp room system let me choose different stages instead of forcing me through levels in a strict order every time. The variety also helped a lot because one moment I was escaping giant boulders and the next I was riding a polar bear or using a jetpack. Collecting crystals and hidden gems made replaying levels much more rewarding, especially when trying to unlock secrets. Some jumps can still be frustrating because of the camera angles and depth perception, but the controls, level design, and colorful presentation still make the adventure really enjoyable today. Oddworld Abe's Oddysee had such a strange world and atmosphere that I could not stop thinking about it while playing. Guiding Abe through dangerous factories, avoiding traps, and rescuing other Mudokons made the adventure much more tense than most platform games I played around that time. I also liked how the game relied heavily on puzzle solving instead of non-stop action, especially when using possession abilities to control enemies and clear paths forward. The pre-rendered environments still look great because every area has so much detail and personality packed into it. The difficulty can become brutal later on, especially with certain checkpoints, but finally solving a difficult section always made progression satisfying. Very few games from that era had this much identity and creativity.
Helter Skelter!
Ridge Racer Type 4 instantly made every race exciting once I started drifting around corners at high speed. I spent a lot of time replaying tracks just to improve turns, unlock faster cars, and see how different teams changed the progression. The drifting mechanics were easy to understand at first, but mastering them took much more practice than I expected. I also liked the stylish presentation because the menus, visuals, and futuristic atmosphere gave the game a really distinct identity. The soundtrack added a relaxed vibe that matched the nighttime city tracks perfectly during longer sessions. The fast gameplay and smooth controls still make this racing game incredibly fun to revisit compared to many other arcade racers from that generation.
Hi, Spyro! Welcome to Glimmer!
Spyro 2 Ripto's Rage improved the original game in so many ways that I ended up spending far more time exploring every world and collecting everything I could find. The levels felt more creative because there were constantly new minigames, characters, and side objectives appearing during exploration. I liked how Spyro gained extra abilities like swimming and climbing, since they made later areas much more interesting to revisit. The controls also stayed smooth, which made gliding around large environments really satisfying during longer play sessions. Some challenges definitely took me multiple attempts, especially the more difficult minigames, but finishing them always felt rewarding. The colorful worlds, funny characters, and huge amount of variety still make this platformer incredibly fun to return to after all these years. Xenogears became much bigger and stranger than I expected once the story started diving into religion, politics, psychology, and giant mech battles all at the same time. I spent hours trying to understand where the plot was heading because the game constantly introduced new mysteries and complicated characters. The combat system also stayed interesting since learning new death-blow combinations made battles much more satisfying as the adventure continued. I especially liked the mech fights because watching massive machines attack each other still looks awesome despite the older visuals. Some parts definitely feel dated now, especially the random encounter rate and long stretches of dialogue, but the ambition behind the world and story still makes the experience incredibly memorable. Castlevania Symphony of the Night completely changed my expectations for 2D action games because exploring Dracula's castle became more addictive the longer I played. I loved discovering hidden rooms, unlocking new abilities, and returning to older areas to finally reach places that were impossible to access earlier. Alucard also controls incredibly well, which made combat and movement satisfying almost the entire adventure. The RPG mechanics added a lot too, since finding stronger weapons and leveling up constantly made progression rewarding. I also enjoyed how the castle slowly opened up instead of pushing me through a straight path from area to area. The pixel art, gothic atmosphere, and exploration still make this game feel special decades later. Final Fantasy Tactics became incredibly addictive once the combat system started clicking and I understood how much depth the battles actually had. I spent a huge amount of time experimenting with jobs, abilities, weapons, and party setups just to see which combinations worked best during difficult fights. The story also became much darker and more political than I expected, which made the conflicts and betrayals much more interesting to follow. Some battles can become brutally difficult if your team is not prepared properly, especially during certain story missions. I also liked how much freedom the job system gave since nearly every character could be customized differently. The strategy, world building, and replay value still make this game incredibly rewarding to revisit.